Everybody, appreciate you being here. Of course, we'll be watching you on the Rumble Rants and out there on the Restream. And those of you over on Twitter Spaces, do listen along. I don't believe we'll be taking calls today, but there's a possibility. If you do want to ask a question of our guest or either of the hosts, you just raise your hand there and I'll try to see you and get you up to the podium. If you come on up, you'll be streaming on multiple platforms. So today it is Steve Kirsch. We've had Steve on before. Steve has been very vocal in his concerns about vaccine therapy. His history, he had retired after founding and selling multiple tech companies, including research engine Infoseek, as well as Frame Technology Group. He has a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT, and he was an inventor of the first optical computer mouse. Of course, Kelly Victory is here to help me out, so let's get right to it. Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say. And although I have more to say at the present moment, I want to bring Steve right in here. Please welcome Steve Kirsch. There you are. So, Steve, do me a favor. If you could just sketch for people who may not have seen you before or heard you before, just how you got into all this, the fluvoxamine study, just kind of a brief sketch. And then I'm going to ask you to bring me up to the present from when we last spoke.
Sure. So when COVID hit, I stayed out of the office because we were kind of locked out and started doing research as to how I could help and found that early treatment was considered to be the safest, fastest, cheapest way to end the pandemic. So I put in $1 million of my own money, raised $5 million from other people, and started asking for grant proposals for early treatments. One of those proposals was for fluvoxamine. Fluvoxamine was very successful in the phase 2 trial, and then it was replicated in a real-world trial by David Seftel, and that led to it being featured on 60 Minutes. And even with the evidence at hand, which was extremely compelling, the FDA said, "Man, we're not convinced. We want more trials." And then a phase 3 trial completed, and then they still did nothing on it. And so it was very clear that the FDA wasn't going to approve any kind of treatments with repurposed drugs for treating this disease, even if it saves lives. And so, but I still believed in the agencies. That should have been my tip off, but I still believe that the FDA was legit, and that if they didn't approve fluvoxamine, which has virtually no downsides in the dosing and the duration that we're giving the fluvoxamine, if they don't approve that, then they must be like super strict. So the fact that they approved these vaccines, and I thought, oh, this is new technology, that explains how they got it so fast. I kind of thought, okay, FDA has been super strict in the past. I should trust them. So I got vaccinated in March, right after the vaccines rolled out, as soon as I could get it. Basically, because I totally trusted the FDA and I trusted the CDC. And then about a month later, I started hearing horror stories from my friends. So one friend had 3 relatives who died within a week after they got the shot, and they were perfectly healthy before that. And I did the math. I said, this thing is only killing 1 out of 1 million. So we're looking at basically 1 over 10 to the 16th. I mean, if you 6 times 3, 10 to the 18th. It's basically, there is no chance that this person was telling the truth if what we were told is true about the vaccines. And the standard for putting a vaccine on the market is like 1 death in 1 million people given the drug. So having 3 relatives die right after they got the vaccine, that was pretty stunning to me. And then a week later, one of my vendors that comes to service my house They had a heart attack within 2 minutes after getting the vaccine. And his wife also was vaccine injured for months. It took her months to recover from her vaccine injury. So there are too many black swans. And so I started looking at the data. And then I wrote this huge article, 100-page article. It was in Trial Site News on May 25th. They said went viral. And basically I said, hey, the article title was, should you be vaccinated? I went through the whole, everything I found in the month since I was woken up, all the evidence. And all the members of my scientific advisory board for my COVID-19 early treatment fund quit within a week. And I asked them, hey, was there an error in my analysis? And they said, no, you're a misinformation spreader and we don't want to talk to you again. Or never contact us again. And so this is how we settle debates in science nowadays. You basically tell the other person, I never want to talk to you again, go away, rather than to resolve the scientific differences. Because it used to be very collegial. We'd be interested in what the truth is and have a nice discussion like we're going to have today. But nowadays, it's you disagree with what we think, and so therefore you should be deplatformed, censored, intimidated. You should be fired and all that. So I had all of that happen to me. I was just fired from my job. Essentially, they said, look, it's either you keep your job and shut up, or if you don't want to shut up, then we're going to fire you. And so I voluntarily resigned at that point because this is too important not to speak out. So that's the sort of the quick background. Quick thing to the present is that the evidence that we have collected right now, and I would bet serious money on this. Okay, and if anyone wants to bet serious money on this, believe me, I'm really anxious to take your money. So the numbers that we're seeing right now from the various polls and studies that we've done is 2 out of 1,000 people will die from the vaccine who are vaccinated. It's higher. It's 30 out of 1,000 if you are 65 or older. But general population, the overall statistics are 2 out of 1,000. And so that means that if, and you have to put, he has to put this disclaimer on, that this is just my research. This is what my research found. And the CDC clearly doesn't agree with me, but you can replicate this stuff yourself. Okay. And the numbers were, basically 500,000 people killed. And in the military, 5% disabled. And then we were seeing more than a 5-to-1 number of deaths from the vax versus deaths from COVID. And we can talk about your patients as well, by the way, Dr.
Yeah, we will. We'll get into the numbers and stuff. I want to get Kelly in here for that. But I find myself, every guest, the part that I'm struggling with is what happened here. What happened to my profession? What happened to my fellow citizens? What do we think happened? Let's start with fluvoxamine. Why do you think they resisted going forward with that so aggressively?
Oh, I'm sure they were told not to. They got some sort of message from the NIH saying, "Don't do this, don't approve this," because it made no sense. We had a real world trial where the people who were the sickest opted for the drug, which means it's better than randomized, because in a randomized you don't get a pick. But here, the people who felt really sick. Yeah, I mean, it just made no sense.
I remember the study. I remember the study. I took the medicine for long COVID.
Yeah,
and it really helped me. Now I've had other people take it and not get so much help from it. But it's a total. Was not even aware I was taking it. I had no side effects, no even effects other than the ringing in my ears went away, and I had a little more energy and things like that. And my syndrome seemed to resolve over about 2 weeks of therapy with the fluvoxamine, even though it had been stalled out for weeks and weeks and weeks prior to that. Coincidence? I don't know. Maybe not. But I certainly did feel better. So it's just, I have this feeling, Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long told us yesterday that her public health training was that when you come up in an emergency like this, you come up with a unified, simplified message, and you just repeat it over and over and over again, and no one is allowed to deviate from that message under any circumstances. And I thought, wow, A, draconian, but B, prehistoric. I mean, that maybe when you had a radio or something, yeah, or Morse code, that would make sense. But in today's world, where you can sit on a stream and explain yourself and put the data out there and tweet it all day long, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I'm wondering if that psychology was entering into everything they were doing. Do you think?
It's worked. I mean, I'm right now. I'm in Tahoe right now, and the shuttle going to the slopes. A family came on, and the entire family is wearing a mask, and I'm like asking them questions like, "Well, I'm curious. Are you wearing your mask to protect you against COVID?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you know how much it protects you?" And he said, "No," and but a little. And I said, "Is there a study that a reference or whatever where you heard that from?" He said, "No, I can't recall." And then I said, "Are you vaccinated?" And he said, "Yeah, yes." And I said, "Did you know that all the cardiologists in the UK, none of them are taking any more shots?" And he said, "No, that's nice. Doesn't change my opinion." Right? And I asked him why he's wearing a mask. He says, "My doctor told me to." "Hey, why'd you get vaccinated?" "My doctor told me to." Right? And so fundamentally, what you have to do is you have to go and silence the opposition, right? Because you can't win on the facts. This is why nobody will show up for a debate. I mean, we can't even get this debate going on Twitter,
Spaces,
where we're reaching, Twitter Spaces, because you're reaching into people like having to have Debunk the Funk represent you, represent the other side. Like, you mean you couldn't find any infectious disease expert, and we're going for Debunk the Funk to represent you? Like, it should be Pfizer going up against. So Pfizer should be putting their A team on this and just debunking us, right? But they're not. They're not showing up at the table. The CDC is not showing up at the table. The editor-in-chief of the Lancet says, "Hey, misinformation is this big problem." So I sent him a letter. I said, "Hey, why don't you host a debate? Let's find out what the truth is. Why don't you host a debate? And you just moderate it." And I gave my cell phone number. No, nothing. And I talked to Peter Doshi
if we offered to have one,
BMJ.
Maybe one behind closed doors would be in order. I'm not kidding. Like, maybe get a group to. No, I'm not kidding. Get a group together just so we can see where everybody's at. I'm trying. Sure. I really want to understand the other side of the table. I really do.
Yeah.
By the way, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if this is from our side, this is all about the truth. Okay, we don't want to 100%. Win the debate. We want
to be
the
wrong.
Truth to win the debate. If I'm wrong, I'm happy. I wrote an article about Celine Dion, and I said, "Hey, it's 284 times more likely that she got it from the vaccine than natural." And I got debunked by Professor Norman Fenton and Scott McLaughlin, both writing papers. It's not as bad as that. And I read it. And I said, "Oh, hey, Scott's paper. He's right about this and that. I should have reduced this by at least a factor of 5. I admit that I made a mistake. But the thing is that I read someone's critique. They were right on the money. There's foreign reports that come in, and more people got the COVID vaccine. So you can't just compare apples to apples that way. I didn't do the adjustment factor. My error." But fine, I admit it when I'm wrong. So, hey, I got egg on my face on that one. But, I'm still right in the direction. It's just no question that vaccines cause stiff person syndrome, right? And that's why it was listed in that FDA document that that Pfizer filed. Not because necessarily this vaccine causes it, but because it is known that vaccines can cause SPS to appear in people. So I acknowledge my error. Okay.
I want to bring Aaron Cariotti up here, who's a bioethicist who's been interested in, who's lost his career too because of standing up for what he believed was right. Aaron, can I get you up here? Just to kind of click on, I invited you to speak. If you don't want to speak, that's okay. I get it. Steve, I just want to hold up.
I'm a big fan of Aaron's work.
I think he must be yours as well. So Annals of Internal Medicine just came in my house just this afternoon. And this was the journal that had the balls to publish the Danish study on masking. Here's Aaron. Hold on a second, Aaron, okay?
Hey, Drew.
Hey,
Yeah.
okay. So they had the Huevos to publish the Danish study that nobody else would study because it was negative on masking. They have a new study in here that showed masking generally it's in healthcare settings in Egypt and Israel and Pakistan, that's masking has some benefit in healthcare settings, but that N95s really didn't add much. So that was interesting. And also a study in here on effectiveness of the booster, the bivalent booster, suggesting that you do get 4 months of decreased deaths and decreased infection after the booster. That's just been published, just telling you. So Aaron, you're here. What are your thoughts? You've been listening to what Steve was saying?
Yes, I just jumped on, Drew. But I was on another Twitter Spaces with Steve the other day and heard him kind of echoing some of the remarks that he's already mentioned. Steve has been trying really from the beginning of the pandemic to get meaningful public debates going,
Yes.
even offering, people on the other side of these debates very large sums of money
Yep.
to try to entice them to engage, in a fair, structured public debate. And remarkably, no one has taken him up on that offer. And this is part of a pattern that we've seen of our pandemic response being advanced under the auspices of science, but with very little pretense to scientific rigor. And then when you push back on that and you start asking pointed, data-based, evidence-based scientific questions, you get either radio silence or you get slander, you get censorship, you get
It's weird. It's odd.
You get steamrolled, which is not how credible scientists.
And Aaron, in addition to being a bioethicist and a scientist, he's a psychiatrist, and I'm trying to understand what is going on. Can you help me understand what is going on in these agencies?
Well, when your position is very brittle scientifically, then you obviously don't want public debate. I think anyone who's really confident in their evidence, in their data, that they're standing on solid ground is happy to debate and happy to respond with reasoned arguments to challenges or to interlocutors.
Aaron, let me push back and say, I think we've been through this weird delusional wave, and I think they've convinced themselves that by allowing any other opinions out into the world is somehow going to fuel conspiracy theory and make the so-called misinformation catch on in some way. I think they're somehow convinced themselves of that. Yeah.
I think that's what many of them have said when you ask them, pointed questions about why you are supporting censorship. They say, well, misinformation, what they consider to be misinformation, is going to be harmful. People are going to be duped by it, and that's going to, cause them to put themselves in harm's way. And so, we're not even going to engage in people that we disagree with because, even giving their ideas space to be heard is dangerous. And that's fundamentally nonsense. First of all,
but Aaron, not only is it nonsense, again, from your psychiatric perspective, isn't that how you induce paranoia? Isn't that how you convince people to be paranoid? Right. That's how you do. If I had a recipe for paranoia is to push things into behind a barrier and they're protected. That the sunlight is what reduces the paranoia.
Just so. And it also shows a remarkable condescension for the average American person.
Yes.
The average American person is not actually in possession of rationality, common sense, logical reasoning. Yes, they may not have expertise in virology or immunology or statistics or what have you, but they can spot a logical contradiction. They can spot fallacies. They can see weak arguments with weak data or information trying to support them. And so instead of trusting the good judgment of the vast majority of Americans who want to do the best thing for themselves and their own health and their families, they say, no, you all are too stupid, quite frankly, and too easily swayed by stupidity or by propaganda to know what's good for you. And therefore, we're going to silence opinions that we don't like, only give you the information that we deem is approved or is sound. And, ironically, the people who are doing that are engaging in the very definition of propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Which is not, I'm going to give you nuanced information and then let you make a judgment about it. It's, I'm only going to give you information that I think is conducive to making you do what I want you to do.
Right.
And
That's right.
it would be hard to come up with a clearer definition of propaganda than that.
Yeah. Jesus, it clearly gives me a chill when I hear you say it like that clearly. But Aaron, I'm going to put you back in the group. Okay, I'm going to get Kelly in here.
Great.
Okay, thank you for coming up. I appreciate it. Aaron Cariotti, Caleb, maybe we can put up all his particulars somewhere in the lower third here. Steve, sorry that Aaron and I got into that conversation, but I find myself before I bring Kelly in every time, just shaking my head and asking, what's happening here? What's going on? Why are we in this situation? I've never seen anything like this. This is so opposite of what my profession has always been, including something that Aaron just mentioned was the lack of collegiality. I mean, we were always collegial. We always called outlying opinions interesting, not misinformation. So let's you and I take a quick break. We'll start to dig into the numbers a little bit with Kelly and get her in here. Okay. All right.
Sounds good.
Right back. Okay. Want to give the gift that keeps on giving? Genucel Skincare keeps everyone on your holiday list looking young and refreshed. And who doesn't need that type of luxury, especially over the holiday season? Genucel has so many products that Susan and I love. Genucel's XV Moisturizer locks in moisturizer on top of the serums, making dry spots a thing of the past, especially great with the colder climate and all the dryness of our skin, right? And with Genucel's Immediate Effect 2 eye cream, you can see the results in as little as 12 hours. Guaranteed or your money back. Susan loves Genucel's DFS Vitamin C Serum, the new Deep Firming Serum, as well as the Hyaluronic with C and lactic acid, which hydrates your skin and makes fine lines a thing of the past, while hopefully preventing future wrinkles from forming.
I am a snob when it comes to using products on my face. The dermatologist makes a ton of money from me. But when I was introduced to Genucel, I was so happy because it's so affordable and it works great. I was introduced to the Ultra Retinol Cream, which I love at night. All the eye creams are amazing. People notice my skin all the time, and I'm so excited because it's actually working.
Take advantage of amazing holiday savings by going to Genucel.com, and you will get 60% off with a special holiday stocking stuffer when you subscribe to My Favorites package at Genucel.com/Drew, and all orders are upgraded to free shipping for the rest of the holiday season. We will get it there quickly. Use code Drew at checkout for an extra 10% off your entire order. That is Genucel.com/Drew, GENUCEL.com/Drew. My guest is Philip Patrick. He is a precious metal specialist, trains at University of Redlands. He has spent years as a wealth manager at Citigroup, and his current position is with Birch Gold Group. So gold has always been somewhat of a safe haven, particularly in times of great turmoil, much like our present moment, I imagine.
Gold has always traditionally been a safe haven asset. Gold specifically has always been about wealth preservation, right? Gold has always held its buying power. You can look at as far back as you like in history. In biblical times, 1 ounce of gold would buy somebody 400 loaves of bread. And today it does the same thing. So it's a store of value. But I would say in times like this, as you mentioned, it's particularly important when you're dealing with things like 40-year high inflation, the air that's coming out of a stock market bubble. These times in particular tend to drive gold and silver up quite significantly. If things are different, the solution needs to be different as well. So I encourage everyone to get informed, and we have a lot of good information here to help your listeners.
Just a reminder, I am not a financial advisor, and I do not give out financial advice nor investing advice. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, countless 5-star reviews, and thousands of satisfied customers. Check them out now. Visit birchgold.com/Drew and secure your future with gold. Do it now. Some platforms have banned the discussion of controversial topics. If this episode ends here, the rest of the show is available at drdrew.tv.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate, public health, to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew.
We are again. Dr. Kelly Victory joins Steve Kirsch. Welcome, Kelly. Thank you for coming in on a special occasion to welcome Steve to the show. I'll let you have it.
Absolutely. Great to see you, Steve. Thanks for being here. It's always great to have a fellow tinfoil hat wearer, fellow purveyor of misinformation to join me, kindred spirits. And I might mention, by the way, back to the question about why they were so put the kibosh on the fluvoxamine study, Drew, I think there's no question they needed to deep six any alternative therapies, because let's recall, getting an EUA, an emergency use authorization for a vaccine, is predicated on two things. The vaccine manufacturer has to submit, number one, that they have reason to believe, based on preliminary studies, that the vaccine will be effective. And number two, there are no alternative treatments.
Yeah.
So if you have alternative treatments, by definition, you are putting your emergency use authorization at risk, and hence the hit job on everything from ivermectin to fluvoxamine and anything in between. Interestingly, until they hacked up some brand new drugs, remdesivir, Paxlovid, molnupiravir, those sorts of things. Those somehow got, miraculously were allowed into the fray. Interestingly, while maintaining the EUA, some people would argue that the EUA should have gone away on that basis. But Steve, I want to talk, when we're coming up on a year now, January 1st is the 1-year anniversary of the top life insurance companies coming out with the sort of bombshell information that there was a 40% increase in all-cause mortality amongst 18 to 40-year-olds. A huge, huge issue that came out now a year ago. You started reporting on this and have been really, along with a few others, really in the weeds on the all-cause mortality. Let's start with that. Bring us up to date on where we are, what the data are showing with regard to all-cause mortality, how it compares to what was initially released back in January, a year ago now.
When you say January a year ago, well, it's the vaccines have, it's been 2 years now since the vaccines have been rolled out. So right now, the best numbers I have, and it's funny because I didn't do this survey. I should have done this survey a year ago, because I started with my Substack a year ago, and I should have done this survey a year ago. I regret not doing this, but I ran a survey recently, and it's the most devastating survey I have ever done because it's so direct. So we're asking healthcare providers, give me your numbers. And most healthcare providers, they don't know what the numbers are, and they can't collect them because there are HIPAA issues, and you're not allowed to do the research, and you're not allowed to do anything. Like, most people don't know. Like, if you treat someone, you don't know whether they died, right? And so most people don't have this stats. So I asked people who are in large private practices where they're not constrained with the hospital system, the Epic system, locking them out and not allowing them to do the research. I asked these providers, I say, hey, look, if you got a medical practice, I want to know what your numbers are. And I got a lot of people responding to that. It wasn't like overwhelming, but it's the numbers were high enough. And the numbers in some practices were high enough that you could make some really, you can get an assessment that whether you were on track or off track in terms of what the VAERS system said and so forth. Because I always like to, have confirmation and look at the whole thing from, do the anecdotes line up? Does the VAERS system line up? Does the population studies line up? Do the government data line up? And then you go and you look at what's happening in these clinics. And so when I've got data.
I was going to say, just to clarify what you were asking them, when you were asking them, quote, for their numbers, were you asking them for their numbers of incidence of certain medical things like pulmonary embolisms and strokes, or asking for incidence of sudden death? What were you asking them for incidence of?
So I said, how many patients do you have? How many patients do you have who are vaccinated? How many patients have died in your practice? How many people have died who are vaccinated in your practice? Okay, so I'm asking them objective questions that don't call for any conclusion whatsoever. And then I ask them, how many people died in your practice from COVID? How many people who are vaccinated do you think died from the vaccine based on your firsthand knowledge of their medical history? So you're asking the experts. You're not asking uninformed people to make a decision. You're asking physicians to make an assessment as to what they think. And the numbers were off the charts. It was like, I mean, they were so bad that when I said, hey, here's what the numbers said, I had to factor them down so that people wouldn't go, say, oh, that makes no sense, right? Because the numbers were coming in that for, it was something like at least 25-1 in terms of number of people that they thought died from the vaccine versus from COVID. And a lot of these practices had nobody dying from COVID. And, so then when you added up all the numbers, we were seeing like 25-1 in terms of if you died, it was 20, the number died from COVID versus number died from the vaccine, 25 times more people died from COVID. So I had it, when I talked about the numbers, I said over 5-1. Because if I said 25-1, nobody would believe me. But that's where the numbers were coming in. They were so off the charts clear that the vaccine was like way worse,
Steve,
at least 5 times worse. Yeah.
Is there any way to tease out COVID plus vaccine? I've been wondering because that group, which is most people now, have had COVID and had vaccine. I'm wondering if that's the magic combination. My clinical experience has been COVID plus vaccine plus booster equals trouble. That's sort of where I'm seeing trouble. I think.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell.
Right. And I didn't dice it down that way, because that gets into individual patients, okay, so how many of those patients who died, and I didn't get to that level because I was just interested in the high level, like, was the cure worse than the disease? And there was no doubt about it that the cure was worse than the disease. And the numbers also made sense. Okay, so the numbers I got from VAERS, and I did the calculations from VAERS, and then I got the numbers from the doctors, and they matched up, like unbelievably matched up. And these are just people just reporting their own numbers. And so, so we were seeing numbers of like 2 per 1,000 overall population that died from the vaccine, and numbers like 30 per 1,000. So in other words, 15 times higher death rate if you were 65 and older. So we had these geriatric practices that are 75% geriatrics. And, so I asked, hey, what's the death rate? What's the death count among those people? And how many geriatrics do you have? And what's the death count that you have from the vaccine? And it's just, it's unbelievable.
That's odd to me because I have a mostly geriatric group I follow right now. I've told you this, Steve, before. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing it in some concerning stuff in younger people for sure. And I'm not sure, is it COVID? Is it COVID plus vaccine? Is it vaccine? It's hard to, tease that all out, as you've said. But I have not had trouble in the 65 plus group. And the data sort of supports me in terms of doing something. In other words, the risk reward there is a little more apparent, it seems like, unless your data is right.
Yeah. So
I'm happy to hear that. Hang on. I'm happy to hear what you're saying, though, Steve, because part of the problem here has been throughout this is that physicians have been reticent to connect the dots. They've been really head in the sand. You go to the emergency department with sudden onset, paresthesia, or sudden onset Bell's palsy, or sudden onset chest pain, or whatever it is, and said, I got vaccinated 15 minutes ago. And you have ER physicians saying, yeah, they're not related. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. They are looking every which way from Sunday to try to explain it away. So if you are gathering information from physicians who are actually willing to say, I think this was a vaccine injury, that by itself is somewhat, I can't say I'm happy about the injury, but I'm happy that my colleagues are willing to own it and acknowledge it.
Yes, and a lot of people basically filled out the survey and said, hey, you can't contact me, but here's my numbers. I want to talk about Dr. Drew's case because this is really, really important to talk about here.
Mhm.
I mean, really important. Okay. Because I want to,
Yeah.
you know, I get people all the time saying, I haven't seen it in my practice. I haven't seen any vaccine deaths in my practice. Okay. And so they say, you know, look, if I haven't seen it with my own eyes, it can't be real, right? Because if it's, you know, if these are the numbers you're talking about, I would have seen it. And, you know, like I would have seen one death or whatever, right? So I want to talk about Dr. Drew's numbers. This is really important, okay? Because I want to explode this
I may
myth.
just
This
be
is the-
lucky.
for the first time.
I may be lucky,
Then we're gonna find out.
or I may, or I, you know, you may see a sort of a random event segregate non-randomly, right? I may see a series at some point, right? All of a sudden, I could see a series. I mean, if your dad is right, that's what should happen. Even though
So let me explain how you, Dr. Drew, can figure out whether I'm telling the truth or not. Okay, so you have 800 geriatric patients. Is that correct? Okay.
Let's say I started thinking about let's say 500 just for the sake of let's just use that number.
Okay.
I think that may be more accurate.
All right. So we'll take 500. Fine. Yeah, 500 geriatric patients. Now, in the last 2 years, how many of those geriatric patients have died for any reason whatsoever? All-cause mortality in the geriatric patients.
30 deaths, probably something in that area. Something in there. But my people have all really wound down at the very end of life where there's nothing more to do. These were not sudden death. These were people in hospice because of aging, that kind of thing. You know, I mean, nothing.
We're getting somewhere now. We're getting close here. Okay. That's a normal.
But that's a normal flow, and that's sort of I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. In fact, I'm sort of amazed lately that people are, you know, able to live into the 90s without difficulty and without nursing homes and without a lot of things that I used to have to rely on.
Okay. So that's 30
and it's not been
deaths.
strokes, and it's not been sudden death. It's not been strokes. It's not been cardiac. It's not been cardiac arrhythmias. Maybe a little more atrial fib than usual. Maybe a little more of that. Maybe. Okay. That could be something. I mean, that could be something.
So let me ask you this. Okay. So let's go into the numbers. I mean, this is important. Okay. 30 deaths.
I don't have the numbers. They're all off the top of my head, though. They're all vaccinated and boosted. Everybody's vaccinated and boosted. All my patients. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
okay.
Hey, so 30 deaths. So what that tells me is that we'll take those 30 deaths and we'll say that it's 15 deaths per year. Okay, fair? I mean, were they spread out?
Yeah.
Spread out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roughly.
15 deaths per year. Right. Okay. So I would have
some were cancers and things too that have been around for a while, that kind of stuff. You had predicted what?
Oh, okay. Well, you know, like my main prediction is two per thousand, right? So 0.2% basically, or 20% of the normal death rate. So if your normal background death rate is 15 per year, then I would expect to see basically 3 people in your practice die from the vaccine. At least 3 people.
Okay.
Now, but it's Poisson distribution. Okay. Yeah. And so the 3 people, so for Poisson distribution, we want to take the square root of 3, and that would be 1 standard deviation. Okay. And so if you're within 2 standard deviations, you know, I don't know off the top what the square root of 3 is off the top of my head. I used to know that. But
Sorry, I don't either.
I know it's between 1 and 2. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that.
I mean,
let me see if my calculator will do it now.
Yeah, 3 up 0.5. Okay, it's 1.7. Okay. So in other words, you're within 2 standard deviations. So you could very well in your practice see because the deaths are not, you know, per annum. It is basically you inject 1,000 people, you're going to get at least 2 deaths, and you're going to get more in the geriatric group. And so I would have expected, you know, 3 people, but getting 0 is well within.
And by the way, maybe there's something. There's so many variables in these situations, and I totally get what you're saying about the 2 standard deviations of within error, but maybe I'm doing something. Maybe I'm more aggressive with ACE inhibitors, or rather with statins or something, and that's having some
or-
sort of effect on endothelial function.
Or maybe some of those deaths are vax related. And, maybe we can have a separate call where let's go down each of those 30 deaths and see which are the most likely ones, and think about, well, does this make sense? Because Asim Malhotra's dad was he's up there in age, right? But he died of a heart attack. Yep. But Asim knew that he had no cardiac risk factors, and he had blockages in 2 of his arteries. Shouldn't have been there. That's what tipped him off.
I think it's harder. I think it's harder, Steve and Andrew, in the geriatric population. And I'm not saying it's not happening. And it's harder in the geriatric population because those are the people who we anticipate will die of various and sundry things. I think if you look at the less usual ones, the died suddenly, and nary a day goes by that you don't read not just a report, but multiple reports. I mean, today's, headlines was, Navy SEAL commander at the ripe old age of, I think, 43, American Airlines flight attendant, age 34, drops dead in the middle of a flight. We have surgeons dropping dead in the operating room. I think Canada's up to something like 10 physicians who dropped dead at their offices or in the middle of surgical procedures. When you look at the rates of died suddenly amongst young, healthy uber athletes, Olympic level athletes, and the International Olympic Committee had done that study well before COVID to determine what is the average annual incidence of otherwise healthy uber athletes dying suddenly, and the answer was 29 a year. And then you compare that to the hundreds that we are having per month. Internationally. Yes. That's where I think it becomes very compelling.
And even with those sorts of headline-y kinds of observations, I think it's really important that our viewers saw what Steve just did on the back of the napkin. I mean, this is why things get complicated, because you have to be able to do these sorts of calculations, and this is, it's why anecdote isn't the sole answer here. It's why you have to really look at the numbers and really analyze the numbers. But keep going on, guys. I'll step out again.
No, and again, well, I, like Steve, am happy to have anybody argue with me about my understanding or my analysis of the data. It's the other thing we were talking about with Aaron. It's the censorship, the derision, the cancel culture, the fact that the thing that we talked about yesterday with Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, the thing that got me permanently banned from Twitter was posting a link to her sworn testimony. Her sworn congressional testimony was deemed, quote, misinformation. I mean, let that sink in for a minute. But the idea that you are raising that for a physician to raise the alarm and say, wow, I'm seeing a signal here that's concerning me, and to not be allowed to have that discussion by itself is a problem. Steve, what I want to talk about, you're talking about your data and your study and your query that you just did. Let's back it up with let's talk about the data out of Germany. Let's talk about the all-cause mortality data that you've been posting about and that I've been talking about out of Germany, and what that corroborates.
It corroborates everything. I mean, all this stuff is super consistent. The numbers out of Germany, people haven't seen it. Go to my Substack, stevekirsch.substack.com, and the top article, the pinned article there is, why can't we talk about it? Hey, if we're wrong, tell us we're wrong, right? And I think the first article is the German numbers. I've been rearranging the order of things, but the first, I think, is the German numbers. Like, how do you explain this? I mean, this is like, it's like flat line, and then boom, goes off the charts. As soon as they roll out the vaccines, and it stays up. It's not like it's a one-time thing, like maybe, it's bad COVID infection that time. I mean, these sudden deaths went from like small to like large, and they stayed large. Okay. There's no way to explain that data. And they tried to obfuscate it with this official thing. And it wasn't even the guys who released the data that made the statement. They had to go to a specialist to say, hey, we'll pay you a lot of money if you can try to discredit these guys, because this is going to cause us a lot of trouble. So they make up this argument, and we look at it and we said, that's actually, let's make sure we're right, because the query that was done, that was sent to these authorities, give us a data set that has blah, blah, blah. And they had to be alive in 2021. And so there's this bias in terms of the data request that needs to be factored in. But the thing is that the data that the chart was made from all the data, not just the match, what's called match, no match. Did it match this criteria versus no match? Because you add in the match versus the no match, and that's everything. And so I was pretty skeptical when this thing first came out, because I saw that they were trying to debunk it. I said, that actually, that makes sense. I mean, these original queries were, and so I went around and around with a Midwestern doctor who was the guy who, first brought this to people's attention. I mean, it was it was actually the German. There's this German Conservative Party that made the request and put out the press release, and then a Midwestern doctor picked it up on his Substack, and he said, "Hey, here's this Christmas gift for you." And I looked at it, and I said, "Yeah, I'm not just sure about it, because it's really convoluted the way the data was, and I had my doubts." And so he went back and he looked at it and so forth. They had other experts look at this, and they're now convinced that they've got it right. And there are enough people who've looked at it. It's a very complicated thing to look at, by the way. You're not going to be able to do it on first glance. But the bottom line is that chart is accurate. Okay.
Well,
you can go and we'll debate anybody on this, because if we're wrong, we want to know it, and that's the difference, is that we're opening up ourselves up for criticism and debate, and let's have the debate if you disagree with us. But any pronouncement on their side it's completely shut up. And I just want to make sure I get in this point in that, Byron Bridle, I posted the lawsuit that he just filed against the people at his university. And you should read that, because it is a detailed account of how these people, if you say anything against the narrative, it's not like they're going to go and look into your allegations and look at it. They're just going to go and pound you and try to intimidate you and take away your faculty privileges and try to have all these rules that apply only to you, and that makes no sense. And they went after him, so much so that there are criminal charges now being leveled against Glenn Pyle, Professor Glenn Pyle, who is, of course, one of the people who debunk this stuff. And it's like the tables have turned. And the other thing is that this ABC, the famous news anchor in Australia, ABC in Australia, just came out saying, "Hey, look, I've been silent up until now, but I want to reveal what I've been hiding." Well, look, you're in the news media. Why are you hiding stuff? That the intimidation, and I just read another email from a reporter saying, "Hey, I can't cover these vaccines because my editors won't let me. They'll fire me if I do. And so I've had to go create my own Substack on this." But, the amount of intimidation tactics, I mean, when you have to resort to that, to stuff like that, to silence people, and the stuff that the university did to Professor Bridle, I mean, that should tell you everything, that these people do not want to defend on the science. They just want to promote the narrative.
He is one of many, and we have Byron Bridle coming up for an interview in the next couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. What many of the naysayers say about the data, as you well know, Steve, is that they say, "Oh, this has nothing to do with the vaccine; it's COVID." Is because these people had COVID. And Drew has asked the very legitimate and well-based question, how do we know what's COVID plus vaccine versus just vaccine? Which is why I believe fundamentally that they are pushing so hard to get a vaccine in every arm, because I am currently the control group, and our numbers are dwindling. I am the control group. I had COVID and have never been vaccinated. I am the proof. And those of us who are in this, small control group, estimated to be less than 17% of the entire U.S. population who has had no vaccines for COVID, we're the control, have had COVID, but no vaccine. They are terrified of people like me, because this control group is the group that's going to prove no increase incidence of myocarditis, no increase in incidence of new onset cancers, no fertility issues, no increased incidence of pulmonary embolism, and up and up, and on and on. And so the more people they can get vaccinated, this more they, chisel away at this control group and make it impossible for us to prove that it's the vaccines, not COVID itself.
Yeah, sure. Certainly. And, the thing is that and I wrote a Substack article about this, which is that it's not working. The censorship is not working. I offered a debate to the CDC. It's an open letter to Rochelle Walensky. It's published on my Substack. And I said, look, Rochelle, hey, it's not working. There are fewer and fewer and fewer people getting the vaccine because they don't trust you guys because you won't debate us. So why don't you debate us and you can crush us? And that will cause people to gain confidence, because right now it's like 1%, it's like 1.7% of kids have getting the latest boosters. I mean, they're losing. Right. They're losing on the numbers. This is why Peter Marks of the FDA went out and said, hey, I'll do anything to reduce vaccine hesitancy except to debate any of the misinformation spreaders. Right. I mean, he didn't say that part, but I offered to debate him. I said, look, you can have us all, and you can use Peter Marks. You can single-handedly defeat all of us in one debate, and it'll all be over, and there'll be no more misinformation. You can solve that problem. No response. The editor-in-chief of the Lancet, he said, misinformation is a problem. I wrote him. I said, you can have us all. Why don't you debate us? Here's my phone number. No call. And the kicker, I think, and I've just found out this today because I don't listen to John Campbell religiously. John Campbell is a really, really smart guy. He's articulate. He goes through the studies. He explains really well what everything means to the layman. So it's he has this massive audience because he tells people, and he doesn't necessarily talk down to people, but he explains, what does this mean, this technical term, and he goes into it. He's a superb educator, and he has lots of followers. John Campbell started this whole thing out believing in the vaccines and believing the narrative. John Campbell has been red-pilled. Okay. Yeah. Now, he doesn't go out and say, I've been red-pilled. Okay. But he's been red-pilled. No,
I listened to his stuff actually pretty religiously from the beginning. I thought he did a nice job of reviewing available data. And so he was a source for me during the pandemic of stuff I discussed on this stream, in fact, because he was just a nice, steady source of good data. And like you said, he'd explain it. He's actually a PhD nurse. There he is. And he's a nurse educator. That's his thing. And he's been in the, in healthcare for 40, 50 years, like me. And I know he's got good judgment. And when he smells a rat, he does it with this, this great British irony. It's like, yes, you think, and then he keeps going and going. And I think Asim Malhotra really got him all the way turned. I suspect that it seemed like that's where he really got really concerned. And then he's seeing the problematic, in the UK, they are starting to look at things. They are getting the government to start to question stuff
that's
slowly.
That's where I was going to go with this next and say, why is it that only in the United States, Steve, we are not seeing any softening of the stance on vaccines? All of the Scandinavian countries have eliminated vaccination for people under the age of 50. In the UK, they came out very strongly and said, you are not, as a physician, to give these vaccines to a woman who's pregnant or lactating or thinking about getting pregnant. They have eliminated vaccines. They certainly aren't giving them to children in most of Western Europe. Why is it that the United States doubles down on a daily basis? We not only aren't backing off, we're it's safe and effective. And they, really are giving you everything from, you've got a punch card, get all 10 boosters and get a free, slushy. It's insane.
I think the WHO came out today and advocated for children or young adolescents or something. So they're kind of moving our direction as well, as opposed to the UK direction. But Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I got to jump here because I have a VSRF call starting at 4:00 that I'm supposed to be hosting. But I can be a little bit late here. But if it's more than 5 minutes, we're in trouble here. So I got 9 minutes left. Hard stop.
But I want to hear that thought. You had a thought in your mind. I want to hear what it was.
Yeah. Well, it's about money. Look, it's about the money. Okay, because why are all the mainstream media not saying anything bad about the vaccine. They don't want to lose the money from the drug companies.
Right.
Why does UCSF play with the mainstream narrative? Because UCSF gets lots of funding from the government. Do they want their NIH funding cut off? Tony Fauci is controlling the purse strings to all the research dollars that goes out to everybody. And Tony likes the vaccine. You speak out against the vaccine, forget about it in trying to get your next grant. So they're not going to compromise. And plus, a lot of them are still blue pill because they look around and they see these other people saying it's safe and effective, and nobody's saying anything. But in the UK, I talked to Asim Malhotra a couple of days ago, and I interviewed him. It's on my Rumble channel because, of course, I get censored on YouTube. But Asim said all of the cardiologists are not getting any more vaccines, any more COVID vaccines, all the cardiologists in the UK. So I think what the UK government should say, look, you either take the jabs that we told you to take, or we're going to take away your license. And great, there'll be no more cardiologists in the UK anymore. I think that's what it's going to take. I mean, it is it is crazy that none of the cardiologists, because the cardiologists are seeing this stuff firsthand. They're seeing the death firsthand. Yeah. They're seeing the myocarditis. We had a Thailand study showing up to 30% of the kids.
Right.
It's like 29 point change. Okay. Have
29.4%.
Right. No heart damage before, and they have evidence of heart damage after. Come on. 30% of the kids? These are kids. These people kids aren't supposed to have heart damage after they get a vaccine. Are you kidding me? What's that? 30%?
No, Steve,
they should be running.
Before you jump, Steve,
to stop
before
this.
you jump, can you mention this DARPA document that we all looked at before we came on the air here?
Yeah.
Real quick.
Yeah, so
what is that?
So this DARPA document, and if you have to scroll down, this has been circulating on Twitter. I'm surprised this just came out. I think it may have come out before, and maybe this is recirculated. But it basically talks about, hey, we got this SARS-CoV-2 program, and we're developing this vaccines against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But it's like, this is... it's an EcoHealth Alliance proposal. This stuff was funded well before SARS-CoV-2 escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And there is some, I forget what the reference was, but there is a second Wuhan Institute of Virology that is right next to the market, the wet market, where this thing supposedly came out from nature. So they don't even just have one across the street, but they have one right, it's next door to the Wuhan, to the wet market. Kelly, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So I think it's Igor's Substack, if I recall correctly. So check this out. On Igor's Substack, he writes, there's a second Wuhan Institute of Virology branch office right next to the open market, and they're doing this gain of function research. It's just like, how could you miss this? I mean,
right. Well, they didn't miss it. They didn't miss it. They refused to report on it. The source, I've said from the very beginning, this source of the virus was a lab in Wuhan. It is absolutely undeniable. Anybody who knows anything about genetic sequencing, all you have to do is look at the genetic sequencing. It is not something that occurred in nature. The analogy I've made to people is that if you've ever received a Word document where somebody has cut and pasted something from another document and they didn't get the fonts quite right, the whole document's in Calibri, but then there's this chunk that's in New Times Roman that's been spliced in, and they didn't quite get it right. And you can see that it was spliced in. That's how this virus looks, from a genetic perspective. There are pieces that are spliced in that do not occur naturally in bats. They clearly is a piece spliced in from HIV, for example. It has every telltale mark of a lab-created virus. Furthermore, we know that Anthony Fauci was funneling U.S. taxpayer dollars through EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak to that lab, and they were absolutely doing gain of function research. To say anything else, it's not that they didn't know that other lab was there. They covered it up. They tried to make it plausible that this thing came out of a wet market. This is, somebody's going to get exposed for this ultimately, and hopefully Anthony Fauci is one of those somebodies. This document.
Let Steve. Let's let Steve
this
jump,
document,
Kelly,
though,
and
is
then
a good
we'll
one.
keep talking about it. Steve,
yeah,
thanks for being here. I know you got to go.
All right. So last words on that is that document appears to be authentic based on everything that I've read, but it hasn't met the, I don't know who the author is, and they haven't come out and authenticated it, but the people who have looked at it believe it to be authentic. It makes sense. There's nothing in there that you would look at this and say, they got the number wrong, or they forgot to cite blah blah blah. There's no question. This is just the greatest healthcare disaster in human history, that the U.S. government is basically promoting a vaccine which has killed 500,000 Americans. I mean, and there is nobody who wants to talk to me about it. And it's not just me, right? It's Peter McCullough. It is anybody on our side. Anybody who says that these vaccines are bad, nobody wants to debate them. So saying that, oh, you're just a misinformation spreader and you don't know anything about medicine, it's not me. It's about debating the facts, and it's about coming to the truth. And what we want is, we're happy to be, proven wrong. We just want the truth to come out, and we want to get into a collegial dialogue where it's not about whether we win or they win. It's about exposing the truth. And Dr. Drew, if you can act as the moderator here, and you can invite someone, who's an infectious disease professor, and let's talk about the evidence on your show. Because you're pretty much in the middle, right? You've been saying that, right? Okay, so
but it's hard to find somebody.
Well, I'll think.
No kidding. I challenge you.
Now.
Well, no,
challenge you.
There's people out there
find someone.
we can get. I mean, let me
bring
think
it on.
about it.
Bring it on. It will be your most amazing.
But here's the deal.
No, it'll be. Everybody will watch it.
I'm wondering if like a Monica Gandhi would come in, somebody more, she's pretty reasonable, but is also concerned about anti-vax sentiments.
And she knows you're not going to rip her apart.
Would she be
Dr. Drew is always fair.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, let me see if I can get her in here.
And we're all about getting to the truth. And Dr. Drew, I challenge you to invite anyone from the other side, because everyone on our side will come.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me see what I can do. It sounds daunting to deal with that, but I will see if we can put something together. Yeah.
Let's get the truth
Steve,
out.
Thank you very much as always.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
That's the goal.
Great to see you, Steve. Thanks.
What's going on here?
Yeah.
All right. So Kelly, I have a couple questions, and they're dumb, and you're gonna straighten me out here. So that DARPA, what was the smoke? What was the concern, the energy around that DARPA document? That they called this an American-made bat virus, and they called it COVID-2. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes. As I said, I haven't been able to read the document other than just how you have on the screen very briefly before we started this show. So I can't speak with authority about it, other than that it references, number one, the U.S. involvement with the development of the vaccine for a virus that they already knew they were creating. It is clearly, acknowledges and calls it a man-made virus, and therefore.
But isn't it the case? Isn't it the case though that this gain of function? People are mincing words. Gain of function. When somebody mentions it, the CDC then goes, "You're talking about bioweapons. We don't do gain of function. We're not doing bioweapon." But they did do altering viruses that gained function in order to generate vaccine therapies, to learn about the vaccine therapies of altered viruses. Would that be accurate?
100%. This is tantamount to Bill Clinton saying it all depends on the definition of what the word is. This is mincing words. This is the definition, Drew, of gain of function. Okay. Gain of function is when you take a pathogen, you alter the way it behaves to do one of several things: to make it more transmissible, to make it more lethal, and to make it more resistant to treatment. Those three things. That's exactly what they did with this. They made it more transmissible, they made it more lethal, and they made it more resistant to treatment. They did all three of the possible things you could do in one.
And by the way, just the fact that in that letter they have they have the moniker American, what was it, Caleb? You zero in on American-made bat virus or something. But the reason I want to zero in on that, yeah, there it is, an American created. That to me means that there must be a French created and a China created and an India created. This is probably not that uncommon a thing. The fact that it has to be identified with a country. I think we need to get that curtain pulled back entirely on what's going on in viral research.
Well, this is what happens.
Mincing words.
Well, here's the background. There wasn't much that Barack Obama did that I agreed with, but the one thing I did absolutely support was the moratorium that he put in 2015 on gain-of-function research. He determined in his administration that it was too dangerous. So they said, no more, we are not going to participate in gain-of-function research any longer. So rather, Anthony Fauci was very much involved with it at that time when the moratorium started. Rather than stopping his beloved gain-of-function research, they simply crafted this shill corporation, this nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance, with his buddy Peter Daszak. Peter Daszak founded this nonprofit. And Anthony Fauci said, okay, we won't do gain of function. We're just going to funnel money, U.S. taxpayer money, and they gave millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth Alliance then gave the money to the Wuhan Lab of Virology. They used that as a shill corporation or shill organization to run the money through so that there wasn't a clear chain from the NIH, the NIAID under Anthony Fauci to Wuhan any longer. They ran it through EcoHealth, which is why Peter Daszak, and there are emails, this isn't again, Kelly Victory's opinion, there are many, many emails that have been released under the FOIA requests between Peter Daszak and Anthony Fauci saying, we need to get on this. We need to suppress any chatter about this being a lab leak. We need to suppress that. And that is really what started Anthony Fauci and the federal government colluding with big tech and everybody else to censor anybody who talked about a lab leak. Because without any question, Peter Daszak clearly has blood on his hands, but so does Anthony Fauci, because they were funding research that was essentially forbidden by the federal government following that moratorium put in place by Barack Obama.
And to be fair, this may not there may not be a direct relationship between this virus that was in this document and the virus we call SARS-CoV-2. I mean, who knows?
Absolutely,
but
possibly.
The fact is, this stuff is going on, and reasonably, it's going on. That's how they study this stuff. But I want to bring in. I'll tell you who I'm going to bring in here is Alicia Chan, that MIT biologist who wrote the book with Matt Ridley about the virus. And she seemed very reasonable, very knowledgeable to me. So when it comes to us getting deeper into the genomics of the virus, I'm going to get her in here at some point for us to talk to her about that. Okay.
Absolutely. And and here's the thing. I think the reason that we don't do gain of function, gain of function is something that's been done over the years, but it needs to be done in an extraordinarily controlled setting.
Yeah.
The concept of doing it with our greatest geopolitical foe really doesn't pass the sniff test. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to go, I got a really bad feeling about actually doing this with the Chinese Communist Party. Maybe you do it with, I don't know, Canada or, England. Yeah. But doing it in China, just, you really have to question why someone would think that was even vaguely in the realm of safe.
Yep, I understand, but it's equally as mystifying to me why they would have accepted the interpretation of their Chinese colleagues on lockdown as some sort of wonderfully thought out, beautifully executed answer to a pandemic, as opposed to just random action of a local Soviet, essentially, to try to protect himself from the uppity-ups who might be upset with them if they don't control this thing. But anyway, whatever. Okay, so it's been interesting and overwhelming at the same time. Somebody asked me just a few minutes ago.
We'll see if we're still on YouTube next week.
Can we think of any other
I don't care if we
medical interventions.
If we're not next week,
whether it's
head over to Rumble.
Hang on a second. So whether it's biologics, whether it's vaccine therapy, or whether it's just traditional sort of pharmaceuticals, can we think of anything that was disproportionately harmed young people? Can you think of anything? Because that seems to be what I think is going on here with this vaccine. And somebody asked me, "Oh, have there been other things like that we could think of?" And I really couldn't think of anything. Although
other things outside of what we did with COVID, because there's no question the interventions with COVID disproportionately harmed young people. Every one of them.
No, he's saying, this guy was asking me if there were other things across the course of our careers, or things we've read about perhaps in medical history, where it was disproportionately borne, the injury is disproportionately in young, healthy people. And I couldn't really come up with anything. Everything I came up with really sort of went under the category of active developmental processes being interrupted, like in utero or young children or things like that.
Yes, and I think the thing that comes closest to that is whatever aspersions have been cast at vaccines in general. I am extraordinarily pro-vaccine, by the way. I really didn't question vaccines in general much until COVID, but I think that we have launched some vaccines that have been problematic, including, for example, the one that was launched for dengue fever, which was just catastrophic and absolutely was responsible for killing hundreds of children in the Philippines because it caused it hadn't been adequately tested, and it caused a huge problem. So the vaccines are generally the thing I go to that say, where have we disproportionately hurt kids? There's no question we've had other vaccines that have been pulled from the market, including, for example, the live attenuated polio vaccine that ended up giving polio to
but these are vaccines that are but these are probably given to young people. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying. So I think that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think of vaccines because the kids are the ones that are getting the vaccines. I can't think of something that was given to all ages but disproportionately affected kids.
Was dengue given to all ages?
No, it was given to children. It was given to given to children in the Philippines, and it caused essentially kids, when they subsequently became exposed to dengue, they created the wrong antibodies, kind of like COVID, because you're creating antibodies to a variant that no longer exists, rather than creating antibodies to the virus you're actually being exposed to. And that's what happened with dengue. The kids got vaccinated. They created a lot of antibodies to that particular thing. When they subsequently down the road got exposed to the actual virus, they didn't mount the appropriate antibody response, and they died.
So, what I'm thinking is, maybe if Steve is correct, if his data is correct, maybe we're just noticing the adverse events more in young, healthy people. In other words, when elderly people get vascular pathology, whatever it might be, or cancers, that's part of taking care of older people. You don't really notice it. That's kind of what he was pressing me on. While if a 25-year-old suddenly shows up with a heart rate of 270, that's out of, that's wild.
And that was my point. And that was my point, is it's harder to show it in the geriatric population, because those you can always explain away. Well, this person's 82 and now they've got an aggressive, colon cancer. It's hard to say. In the younger population, when you start seeing cancers, for example, that we talked about with Dr. Ryan Cole, particularly lymphomas, melanomas, colon cancers, in people under the age of 40, that has never happened before. These are things we simply haven't seen in that age group, and therefore it makes it a lot easier. I'm not saying it's not happening in the older population, just that it's easier to connect the dots in a younger, healthier population.
Kelly,
and why yes.
There's a guy I'm bringing up here right now who I spoke to the other day. I don't know if you were on that show, and he's got some data out of Massachusetts that goes right out what we're talking about. Just he's on the spaces. He didn't put his hand up. I asked him to come up here. So John, if you wouldn't mind, I know you've emailed me and I've been meaning to get back to you. Unmute yourself there and explain to Kelly what your data has shown.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me up, and nice to meet you, Kelly.
Thanks.
So I got all the death certificates in Massachusetts. I'm sorry?
Keep going.
I'm sorry. Nice to meet you too.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. So 420,000 at first, and then we got an update. It brings up to 460,000 death certificates. It's roughly, on average, about 60,000 deaths per year. I have every ICD-10 code and every CODI A, B, C, D field, as well as conditions contributing. So that's the narratives that the doctors write, as well as the coders that the medical coders apply to it. And it's hard to do without my slides, but I'll try to do the best I can. Within about 8 weeks in now this is just Massachusetts, bear in mind, every state is different, and finding signals is very difficult unless you separate it. And what I did was I separated 15 different age groups, and I used semi-monthly periods, so 24 periods per year, 15 different age groups. The COVID was really about 8 weeks in Massachusetts from middle of March to middle of June. There's about 8,000 excess deaths in that time period alone. Most of them were over 85. Now, what happened was the over 85 population that died off in that short period of time, it created a deficit, or people say dry tinder, right? So it created a deficit that stepped down the signals for nearly 2 years. And I show that in the graphs and in the data. So what you mentioned, geriatric, and it's people talk about young people dying. It's not young people dying. Everybody's dying at the same rate that die of COVID, except that in distribution, but at a greater rate than COVID. So the older people, I'll give you an example. One death certificate, Vermont. I might have mentioned this the other night, I'm not sure, but a 98-year-old woman gets injected within minutes. Heart rate goes to 145 beats per minute, stays there for 2 days. You know what happened after 2 days of a 98-year-old with a heartbeat that fast? She died of a heart attack. Okay. So it gets coded as a heart attack, says nothing about the vaccine. You have doctors all over the US asking for, we need codes for vaccines. No, we don't. Y590 is viral vaccines. T881 is complications from immunization elsewhere not classified. They exist. There's one single death certificate that one medical coder, probably an intern that came out of college and didn't know better, actually used the real codes on one death certificate with a medical examiner, Rebecca Diedrich in Boston. I think it was Solomon Kizito was the decedent. That's how I found it. And
John, there's a weird phenomenon where the coroners and those county health facilities and whatnot will not accept certain things. It's very odd,
right.
There's a part of this story that only doctors know, which is when you actually try to describe what happened, they won't, if you put aspiration pneumonia, God help you. And so you have to say, died of heart stopping, cardiopulmonary arrest due to pneumonia. And then later, it's sort of off in the corner, you can put aspiration pneumonia somewhere. But that's just the way this system works. It's draconian.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. In fact, in fact, looking at them, I can tell you the behaviors of each individual medical examiner.
Interesting.
The two of them are defendants. Actually, I have 4 defendants in my lawsuit. 4 of them are medical examiners from Massachusetts. The chief medical examiner, also the commissioner of the Department of Public Health, and the governor of Massachusetts are all named in my federal lawsuit. Exhibit F is 123 pages of correlated death certificates and VAERS records, as well as many that say, it's X42 acute fentanyl intoxication, and that they tested the dead body. It says SARS-CoV-2 positivity in the setting of
fentanyl overdose.
I said that backwards.
Hey, Drew, I used to laugh and say when they'd hand me a death certificate to fill out, I'd say, they should give it to you as a multiple choice. Like what are the diagnoses you're willing to accept? Because rather than me actually writing the truth,
was that just in California for you? Was that just
no? I was in North Carolina and Ohio and Florida. No, you'd say
it's so weird.
Make it a multiple choice and tell me which one I can choose from because you don't want the truth.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mention this because I can tell a physician from a medical examiner just by the way they're coding things. Now, there's this one physician that I found, and I looked up, I think, 20 or 30 of his records. And he just put the same thing in CODIA, cause of death A, every single time, no matter what, and then filled in the rest.
Yeah, because listen, and then the press goes, leading cause of death is cardiac arrest. The heart stopped, and guess what? That's the way they make you code it, because the heart does stop, of course, but they won't let you talk about the reality. Anyway, that's a topic. Maybe you'll change that with this lawsuit, and maybe this lawsuit will be the public debate that Steve was just talking about. Maybe you'll get to actually show both sides of the vaccine story.
Well, it's not just what I found. I mean, I did interview a medical examiner working in Boston for 3.5 hours and reviewed hundreds of death certificates with her. And I know the practices that they were doing. They're supposed to do things. They didn't show up to work because they were afraid of COVID in the first wave. And they coded things without seeing. They didn't do blood labs. They didn't do tissue samples. They didn't do imaging. They called up the old folks home and said, "What happened?" "Well, she started coughing and then she died." "Okay, COVID." I guarantee you 80% of the deaths from COVID in Massachusetts are fraudulent.
I saw it all the time. Yeah, there's no question. We had people who had mass trauma who Go ahead.
Yeah, no, there's a little girl, 7 years old, who, this is what set me off. I saw it in the news, 7 years old, said she died of COVID. Like, there's no way. She was a healthy girl. I have seen 7-year-olds die of COVID, but they're obese, Down syndrome, they get major problems. But this was a healthy girl. So I got all the records through a public records disclosure, and then found a VAERS record. She reacted within 5 minutes of the vaccine, threw up for 8 to 10 hours. They injected her again 3 weeks later, and she had stomach pain, spiked 103-degree fever, and died in 3 days. You know what they put on the death certificate? COVID.
So, John, are you an attorney?
No, I'm doing this pro se. You want to hear something funny? Well, it's not funny. I lost my son 4.5 years ago, and I'm doing this to try to save families from losing kids. What I was going to say was funny is I went to law school for a year at 56 years old. I got kicked out because I wouldn't get the vaccine, and so here I sit at 58. And I'm deaf in one ear because I got a shot when I was 4 years old. They mixed streptomycin and penicillin together in 1968 as a prophylactic for the Hong Kong flu, and that's how they learned.
The streptomycin did that. So Jesus Christ. So, we need to interview some more. Of course, I want to get you to have you show your slides to us at some point here, but sort of overwhelmed when I hear you talk, and because it all sounds so familiar from the depths of the dark hours of this pandemic, and some of the things that I was fearful was going on, you're telling me were going on. I'm going to ask you what I normally ask at the beginning of this program. What happened? Why do you think people did this? What happened to us? What happened to my profession?
Well, so I was in sales for over 30 years in semiconductor research, and it was my job to know people and everything. So what happened? At every level, there's a different story. There are doctors that felt coerced. There are doctors that felt that they should just follow the authority. The younger doctors who grew up with EBM instead of just regular scientific method, they were told that just listen to the authority, listen to the FDA, and that's it. The older doctors who were, it used to be that a practice would have, 4, 5, 2, 10 at most. And you would go to a doctor, and there'd be the elder statesmen, 1 or 2 doctors that the younger guys would defer to because of their wisdom and experience. And the central authority might say, "Oh, you have to do this," and the old guy would say, "No, you don't do that. They don't know this case."
All the time. Listen, I lived through the opiate thing. You don't need to. I mean, if you want any example of how centralized authority kills people, just the opiate overprescribing that was mandated. I was crushed by all the regulatory agencies for resisting that. It was a terrible, dark time for me. So this all feels very familiar to me. But the magnitude of this one, the intensity of the
that's the incredulous thing that people have trouble with. But if you look at that letter from the American Board of Internal Medicine, American Board of Pediatrics, American Board of Family Medicine. I think I missed one there, but anyway, you can look at it on the web. It says any doctor spreading vaccine misinformation will have their certification suspended or revoked. And that's coercion right there. And it's out in public. And it's from the three CEOs of those boards. Now, if you look up where those boards get their money, there's a lot of, Gates money going around. If you look at the New England Journal of Medicine from the Mass Med Society around since the late 1700s, it's one of the premier, journals in the world. You'll find that Gates came by and dropped off $12 million in 2018 for, whatever research, which is basically grants to write papers. And you got to write the right paper to get the money.
Well,
so this is all coercion.
Yeah, we get it, but Gates, even he has been softening lately. He's been a little concerned and looking at things. It seems like, but anyway, guys, we could chase our tails through this for a long period of time. We will. I'm going to get you in here, John. And Kelly,
email your deeds to contact@drdrew.com.
No, he did. You forwarded it to me.
I did.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll get it back, and you can get them set up.
Kelly,
I'm going to wrap this up. It's been a really challenging show for me. I'm upset. You know what I mean? I'm normally
Kelly and I are going to go have vodka for my birthday.
I know. Yeah. Happy birthday, Susan. No, I understand that
the
feeling.
End of these shows, I'm just shaking.
No, well, that's the thing. Is it's hard to stay. It's hard to not get sucked in. I did a show before I was on with you today, a radio show, and I said, truly, I say this not in a condescending sort of way, but more because I struggle with it myself. It's very easy to get sucked into the constant negative, to really lose hope in what's going on with our profession, with humanity. And all I could say is, put down your phone, go celebrate. It's a time of great joy.
Yeah.
It's Susan's birthday. Mankind still has a lot to offer to one each other. There is hope. I don't intend to stop saying the truth. I think that we will encourage people to have open debate, and I'm hoping that our participation together on this platform will help to rejuvenate the moribund history of a robust, vigorous debate in medicine. And so let's bring it back.
And I hope we're wrong.
I
hope there is some sort of middle ground that we emerge into, that we find that we can sort of still have some value in some of these products and use them properly. Just understanding the risk reward, with much greater clarity. All right. So we will see you next week for Asim Malhotra, which again will blow everybody's mind.
Should be really good.
He's a great guy. Susan, are we going to do Tuesday and Thursday?
We're off to New York. So Tuesday, no, we're flying. I think, aren't we flying on
No, we're
Tuesday?
flying Monday.
Monday. Oh, maybe. I don't know. I haven't talked to Caleb.
So we might do some Q&A from New York.
It's Christmas, we'll do what we can. Maybe
we'll see what Susan's mood is on Tuesday.
Well, happy birthday. Have a martini for me. Happy birthday. Okay. And we will see you next week. Okay.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Yeah, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Not yet our Happy New Year show.
Happy
Not the end of the year. Happy Hanukkah. Happy holidays, everyone.
It's all at the same time this year.
This has been a really interesting couple of years that we've been doing this show. It's been probably 2 years now, Susan, this show?
This show?
Yeah.
What, with
Caleb?
Kelly? Oh, with Caleb.
Yeah, I would think about 2 years, but it really took off in the past 6 months. Specifically the past 3 months.
But I would say that,
because they didn't censor us on YouTube.
But look, let's just recap the sort of history here. We started as the French Underground. We were just trying to get people to calm down and be a source of
Dose of Dr.
information
Drew.
and a place to answer questions and to cool everybody out a little bit and to try to keep people abreast of information as it came through. And then it started getting increasingly clear that something was up. Something wasn't making sense. We were hearing points of view that sort of were concerning. And
then getting pulled off YouTube.
And then we started getting crushed for things that didn't make sense. And then we started seeing people like Jay Bhattacharya, who we got to meet these people as we went along. Like these are the people that were canceled.
Right.
I mean,
the
it made
best
no
and
sense
the brilliant
whatsoever. And then a growing swell started coming along of physicians and concerned professionals and concerned citizens that something is not right. So that's where we are right now. I don't know where we're going to end up. I want to believe that I still believe that when the day is done, we'll be able to give better informed consent on what we're doing with young people, particularly young people who have really no risk from COVID and may have some real risk from the vaccine. We can weigh these things out and talk to our patients about it. in the very elderly population where the risk of the COVID is quite substantial and the risk of the vaccine may not be as substantial, but maybe something. We can understand more clearly what that something is. We will have made real progress. So hopefully...
well, we got lucky with Rumble coming along too when they did.
Right, so we could keep talking.
Thank you, Dave Rubin.
Yes, thank you,
Because
Dave.
we were able to diversify and get out on a lot of platforms when we were being pushed down. And I don't know, I can't imagine Drew giving medical misinformation. That's just,
it's a weird idea. But because they were able to sort of paint me that way at the beginning of the pandemic, and I hope you guys understand how these videos and things work now.
Well, they were threatening your credibility and your license. Look, when you have a license, you have to go underground.
They
I guess.
cut videos up. Do you not? You speak of misinformation. I hope you understand stuff now you see on Twitter is presented in a certain way. The stuff that was specifically edited from all of my comments was listen to the CDC, listen to Dr. Fauci, stop panicking, which is what I was ultimately concerned about. What is this now? Pandemic is over.
Yeah, I mean, I always said history will not be kind. And it's starting to turn into that because smart people are going out and getting the facts. And that's what, looking back on something, you can make better decisions based on what the actualities were. We didn't know what they were going to be, but you kind of predicted it. But
well, I do remember this video of me, Caleb, you probably can find this. Actually, Gary over at Corolla has this. The night that LA County decided to close the schools, I am sitting talking to the school board members going, why are you doing this? What doctor, what infectious disease? Nobody told us. We just think it's the right thing to do. I was like, what? Why are you doing this? Where did the decision-making come from? What's going on here? It's all was just out of sheer panic and this running to one side of the boat. It was just a crazy, crazy time. And I feel like we're kind of coming out of that, the delusional, whatever we were in. And that is, as a result of us sort of emerging from that, we're starting to look around at some of the other facts that are troubling us, and we're able to actually sit and talk about it. And, it's just, today was an interesting show, and I'm troubled, but I'm going to have a good holiday and a good birthday dinner with Susan, and I hope you all have a nice holiday as well.
And I'm sorry for everybody who lost one to the vaccine. That just sounds horrific, especially
we
children.
had a caller yesterday or day before.
Yeah.
That was
it breaks my heart. And, I'm just hoping that we can move forward and not have that event happen for anybody in the future.
Or at least if things happen, the patient or the family who makes the decision to proceed with the therapeutics or the vaccine, whatever it might be, understood the risk going in. We're not presenting
kids
risk
don't
to anybody.
Understand that.
What are you putting up there, Caleb? What is
it's
going
a meme.
on here?
It's one of my favorite memes from the pandemic.
What do pro-vaxxers and anti-vaxxers have in common? They'll never be fully vaccinated. I'm not sure I get it.
Look at Steve Kirsch's Twitter.
Keeps going.
Okay, all right. Just because it keeps going.
Well, thank you for having Steve on my birthday because I've loved him for a long time. When we were getting censored on YouTube, I asked him to start a new platform. Remember that, Caleb? Mm-hmm. I was like, if you want to make Dr. Drew and TV into YouTube, we could do that. Yep. And then Rumble came along and they beat us to it. So
there you go. All right.
But he has been very passionate from the beginning, and I appreciate. And he pitched this idea to me like a year ago.
What idea?
Having a debate between him and a doctor, and we couldn't then. I mean, it was just we would have gotten in trouble by somebody, just
do you think Monica Gandhi is adequate for this, or we need somebody more aggressive?
You'd have to chat
absolutely
it up with her and ask her, because
she would be very
Do you think Monica would be good?
Oh yeah.
She's but she's not, but she's more like me. She's in the middle a bit, I don't know.
It's difficult because the type of person that would be the best to speak with Steve Kirsch and to be a part of that, they actually wouldn't come on. Like you've seen how hard we've actually tried to get some of the people on that have been attacking you on Twitter, and none of the experts will actually do it. Like that doctor that we had on last week was the only one that's agreed so far. I've actively tried to get them just to come and back up their claims. Yeah, exactly. He's the only one that could do it.
I don't know. They're also boring. So.
Well, but I mean, Steve, if it's Steve versus some of these folks, it'd be I don't know.
It's hard to find people who are really pro-vax now. It's harder.
Well, no.
What about Dr. Celine?
It's just hard to find.
Dr. Gounder.
Clean Gounder.
Yeah, at some point in the future, not now, but
she just had a major loss, and I don't want to be. I don't risk the possibility that somebody says, "Hey, what do you think?" You know.
Yeah. So we don't know if it was.
I just don't want to do that to her. But she would have been perfect. She would have been perfect.
She would have been, before her.
I wonder if died. What is the woman that? Well, let me think on it. Anyway,
I know it's hard.
Yeah,
we have a long list of people.
Someone suggested Dr. Peter Hotez as well. He was on the show before.
Yeah, Hotez was somebody I was thinking of, and he I think he would end up. I really would like an infectious disease doctor in here, somebody who's actually actively seeing patients, so somewhere in that zone. And the hard part is, Steve talks about data, and you're going to need to have Dr. Fauci come in. We're going to need to have like an epidemiologist, I think, to really get.
We tried to get Dr. Fauci, and he almost came on, and then he made a.
Is that true?
360. Yeah, Michelle almost got him.
Interesting.
We tried to get Dr. Campbell too, but he ignores us.
Yeah, so. Campbell would be great, but he's not. He would just be a good intervy.
I think it's
okay. Well, let me think
difference.
on it. And
who knows? Maybe now.
Meantime, everybody have a great holiday, and we'll see you on the other side.
Happy.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.
How long have we been friends? For a long time. You're just gonna drop chthonic Dionysian soup on me right now?
Way of saying it.
I'm naming the third kid that.
Chthonic just means like out of the swamp, and then Dionysian means out of the expressive chaos, right? Like sort of right brain stuff. No, yes?
No, I just love you, man. You just casually said chthonic Dionysian soup. All right, let's take calls.
All right, well, let's talk about someone's penis explodes on weed. It's okay. Hey, Hitler. Let's proceed from there.